All right, hello, I'm Jade.
I'm Sharina.
I'm Eralys.
I'm Ella, and I will be kicking off our Videocast presentation. Let me just share my screen really quick. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay, is it full screen for you now?
Yep.
hmm
Okay, perfect. So the film I have selected is Beizai's 1982 film, Bashu the Little Stranger. Um, Before I get into my shot analysis and thoughts on the movie, I'm just going to provide a short synopsis of the film as a refresher. So, Bashu is an Afro-Iranian boy, and he has lost his family and been displaced because of the Iran-Iraq War. He makes his way to northern Iran, where the war is not as prevalent in people's day-to-day lives, and he finds a woman named Nai and her children working in the fields and is taken in by this family. However, Nai is heavily judged for taking care of Bashu, as the townspeople have never seen someone as dark as him before, and so they believe he's dirty and want Nai to throw him back out to the streets, basically. So, the scene that I would like to discuss is near the beginning of the movie. When Bashu first arrives in northern Iran, he finds the farm that belongs to Nai. The scene I want to talk about begins when Bashu emerges from the bed of a truck and looks around. Northern Iran is a lot different than where he's from, so he's just taking it all in. It's a lot more rural in the north, and the impact of the war is not as visible. He becomes frightened when he hears the sound of bombs and begins running until he makes his way through the field where Nai and her children are. The children spot him, yell to their mother, and this is where Nai is introduced to us. She pops up into a close-up shot while she is readjusting her hijab, pulling each end in an opposite direction around her head. She makes her way toward the children, sees Bashu hiding in some foliage, and throws mud at him. As I said earlier, this scene is in like the first 15-ish minutes of the film, so it's a kind of exposition that helps us get to know the characters. We see Bashu run away in fear after hearing the explosions, which lets the audience assume that Bashu has trauma from the war. And we see Nai being pulled in two different directions by her hijab, which is exactly why I believe this scene and the introductory shot of Nai in particular are so important. And I will expand on that later. But first, I'm gonna try to screen share that moment in the movie. Okay, one second. All right. Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
Is my face blocking it? I just realized I'm still
No.
in the corner. Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
And you should like give me a thumbs up if you can hear it when I start playing.
Oh, I can't see it anymore.
Oh,
Yeah, it's fine.
no. How do I get it back? Sorry, guys. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't hear it at the moment.
I think you might want to reshare to where you can add audio.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine.
You were so right, Sharina. Thank you. Is that better?
There we go.
Okay.
این تونل کی وا میشه؟
کم کم، آهسته آهسته
فقط برسه قبل از برف.
میگن.
Ahora viene var, kılgınlık var.
All right, so that's the scene that I have decided to focus on. Let me get back to my PowerPoint. Okay, can you guys see it? Okay, so, oh, and let me go to the next one. There we go. So, just to identify the particular in not just this scene, but the entire film, things that maybe we can't relate to, but they do, the particular does relate to the universal, as I'll talk about in a moment. First, Bashu and I speak completely different dialects, even though they're both from Iran and they both speak similar languages. The dialect makes it like a total language barrier. Like they can't understand what the other one is saying. The architecture in the town is not like architecture I've seen before. It's simple since they're in a really rural area that, and a lot of them work on the land and they're far away from major cities. Nai's family appears to be working class and their father is away on a business trip for most of the film. And another like particular thing about this film that not everyone might be able to relate to is the fact that the war is in the background of the film, and it's a constant reminder for the audience of Bashu's trauma. So connecting the particular to the universal. Um, the human condition is like a big thing here. Bashu is vulnerable not only because he's a child, but because he's been displaced by war and ends up in a place where he has trouble communicating with people. There's also structural predicament because, as I said, Bashu is displaced by war and his family has been killed, so he's all on his own. There's a more structural predicament because Bashu is oppressed in the north of Iran due to his dark skin. And, no one there has seen someone with skin as dark as his before, so they treat him differently and they don't want him to be a part of their community. And then the biggest universal theme, I think, is this last one, existential dilemma, because despite the language barrier in the town and, everyone's determination to isolate Bashu because they view him as different or they like other him, he craves a sense of belonging. And a quote from the film that I really like that I think shows this universality is when Nai is having Bashu write a letter to her husband near the end of the film, and it says, and she says, he is like all children, a child of the sun and the earth. The universal desire to belong is brought to us through Bashu's very specific circumstances, yet the specificity of it doesn't diminish the meaning or the universality. Universality matters because even if you know nothing about the Iran-Iraq War, even if you watch this film without subtitles, you still feel empathy for Bashu. One does not need to understand Iranian historical and cultural context to understand the fear, grief, and loneliness of a child. We still sympathize with Bashu because we know about human suffering and the structures of oppression that harm ordinary people, like war and colonialism. Yet the things that Bashu goes through are not particular to this suffering. Now I'll talk a little bit more about mise en scène and how it helps the particular emphasize the universal. So first, design. In the scene that I showed you guys, I believe that setting, decor, and properties are the most important because they set the overall look, environment, and feel of the world of the film. The film is really pretty, but it's not like otherworldly. It's still realistic. It's something that looks like real life, things that could happen in real life. And this reality establishes a kind of synempathy and makes it easier for the audience to get sucked into the world of the film, and therefore makes it easier to empathize with Bashu. Second, composition. First, the shot composition when Bashu makes his way into the field, this one that I have on the right side of the screen here, helps us get inside his head. He's such like a tiny part of this massive field spanning out in front of him. The extreme long shot, lead room, and deep space composition Beizai gives us allows us to feel just as lost as Bashu does. Because of the shot composition, the field seems never ending, also allowing the viewer to feel the sense of anxiety that Bashu does as he's exploring. He's in this massive space with so many different places and paths to go, as you see but from the still on the right, but he has no idea where he is, and the composition of the shot emphasizes this um, sense of fear he has because he's lost. Third, lighting. The high key lighting in this scene evenly illuminates everything, making it impossible for Bashu to hide. In the bright of day, he cannot escape the eyes of Nai and her children, even when he goes into the bush. The audience also has the sense that Bashu has nowhere to hide because of the lighting. When Nai spots him in the bush and throws mud at him, even if he tries to go in the shadows, the high key lighting still will make him visible. And fourth, the kinesis. Bashu's frantic movement across the field and his anxious run away from the family not only shows his fear of potential danger after he's been through the war, but also helps the viewer understand how he's feeling through his frantic and anxious movement. All of these elements of mise-en-scène come together to help the audience understand the fear and isolation that Bashu is feeling because of the particular events he's been through. The mise-en-scène connects the particular to the universal and helps the audience empathize with characters, even if they don't understand exactly what Bashu is going through. Now I'll move on to the specific shot from this scene that I would like to focus on. It's this one when Nai's first introduced to us. I think that this scene, but this shot and this still in particular, is critical to the narrative, the themes in the movies, and the cinematic structure of the film because it is when the forces pulling Nai in different directions are initially introduced, and opposing forces is something that haunts the narrative for the rest of the movie. So, um, I think this shot does a great job incorporating radical humanism, like we've talked about in class. This moment, just like a lot of the plot, is less focused on having quick-paced, action-packed moments and more focused on the viewer getting to know the characters. We see this with Nai right away from the moment she appears on our screens. Even though it's the beginning of the film, we understand that she is being pulled in opposing directions because of the way um, the camera frames her. It's a close-up shot and her hijab is being pulled in different directions. So I've already discussed the mise-en-scène earlier, so I'm just going to touch on editing, sound, and cinematography really quick. So, as you guys saw, the scene uses continuity editing. Continuity editing. There are some match on action cuts, but the audience is never unsure of what exactly is going on. Like we know that Bashu is running, he's in a new environment, we can see based on like how he looks around. There is some dialogue between Nai and her children, but that's really it for like vocal sound. We mostly just hear the sounds of the explosions and Bashu's footsteps as he runs off into the field. Um, and then cinematography, which I think is the most important part of this scene and this shot in particular. Um, we see Nai pop up into a close-up shot. There's eye level framing, natural high key lighting, and one end of her hijab is being pulled into each corner of the screen. And this is why cinematography is the most important component of this scene. It helps visually emphasize the first set of many opposing forces in the film. In fact, like I said earlier, opposing forces are a major theme in the film. Just take the conflict present in the movie, for example. Iran and Iraq are at war and therefore a set of opposing forces. On a smaller scale, Nai is also being pulled in different directions by her community. After she takes in Bashu and, they grow really close despite the language barrier, people in her village think that she's wasting her time and they think that her looking after Bashu is pointless because of their um like the prejudices they have and the fact that they've never seen someone like Bashu before, they don't understand. However, Nai cannot ignore her morals. She is pulling herself away from the advice of her community as she continues to care for Bashu. But Nai isn't the only one that faces opposing forces in the film. Bashu does as well. After his family is taken by the war, he struggles balancing the forces of his new family and his old family while he searches for that sense of belonging. As I talked about earlier, he's like stuck in the middle of his new family and old family, and he feels like he doesn't truly belong anywhere. Plus, he's being pulled in different directions because of his mixed identity. As an Afro-Iranian boy, he cannot completely fit into one community or another. He's always viewed as an outsider or an other. So, it's clear that there are several opposing forces present in the film, and this shot is a perfect introduction to these ideas. Finally, my reflection on the course. Before taking this class, I hardly knew anything about the Middle East. I hadn't learned about it in previous geography or history classes or anything like that. All I knew was from social media and movies. So I came in with like hardly any background. I wasn't even aware that there was not one unifying factor for all the people living in the Middle East. The only idea of the region I had was what I had seen in Orientalist movies from Hollywood. However, as the article we discussed during our last class session stated, you do not fight Hollywood with critical argument. You fight Hollywood with Akira Kurosawa, Sajid Ray, Abbas Kiarostami, Ilya Suleiman, Nuri Bilge Ceylan, Mufadi Talti, Usame Sembene, Yasujiro Ozu, Guillermo del Toro, Mai Masari, and more. You do not battle misrepresentation. You signal, celebrate, and polish representation that are works of art. And I think this is exactly what we've done in this course. We haven't focused on how Hollywood portrays the Middle East. We've focused on how people in the Middle East represent themselves. So, after watching movies from the Middle East that accurately and authentically portray the lives of these people, I feel that I've learned more about the Middle East than I could have through any other medium. And maybe this is why cinema, compared to other mediums, is such a powerful way to represent the Middle East. Cinema doesn't just describe what it's like to be a person in the Middle East, it shows us. It shows us through editing, mise-en-scène, sound design, and cinematography because all of these things come together to emotionally immerse us in the world of a film, counter Orientalist narratives, and portray the many kinds of lives that are lived in an area of the world that is often believed to be lawless, timeless, and uniform. And that is all I have for my presentation. I'll stop my screen share and I'll open it up to questions if you guys have any.
Okay, Ella, I had a question for you.
Hmm.
We kind of talked about sacred defense cinema a little bit in class.
Hmm.
How do you see sacred defense cinema in Bashu comparing to other kinds that
Hmm.
you've seen in the past or even in the present?
Hmm. I know that we talked about during the Iran-Iraq War, the two main kinds of cinema that were being created were the mainstream war films with like exaggerated heroes and then really demonized enemies, whereas sacred defense cinema rejects like this really polarized type of narrative and emphasizes um, like transcendental universal aims and also puts a lot of emphasis on pacifism. However, I think it's interesting because as we kind of talked about a little bit in class, Bashu rejects both of these dominant forms of war cinema because it breaks some of the aesthetics and traditions of sacred defense cinema as well, which is just another binary. It's like getting meta because it's not a binary in the film. It's like the binary of the film. Um it's like defying these two traditions of war cinema, which is really neat. All right, I think Jade, you're going next, right?
Yes, that was great. I'm like, now I have to follow that. So yes, I will share my screen. And I have to do me as the little background. Let me make myself bigger real quick so I'm not lost behind my presentation. There we go. Okay. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And can you see me in the corner still?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so hello and welcome. I'm going to be talking about dry grasses, and I'm Jade. All right, so an introduction. Again, I'm talking about dry grasses, which is
Wait,
directed
I'm
by
so
Jalon.
sorry.
Yes.
There's this thing, it says audience window and it's like
Oh,
covering your slides. I don't know if it's like that for you guys, but
okay.
okay.
Is that better?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm
Sorry.
sorry.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay. So yes, so About Dry Grasses, directed by Jalon. It was released in 2023. And then a brief synopsis is in a remote Anatolian village, art teacher Samet faces allegations from a student, which leads him into a complex relationship with Narai, a fellow teacher and survivor of a terrorist attack. So my selected scene goes from the 2 hour and 32 minute and 55 second mark to the 2 hour, 34 minute and 16 second mark. And it appears towards the end of the film, and in my opinion is probably one of the most notable moments of the film. So this scene follows Samet as he exits Narai's house, walks through the soundstage, enters the bathroom, and then returns to Narai's bedroom. And although this moment is seemingly out of place, it is important to the overall narrative because it is a disruption in the film and is jarring in a way that pulls us out of the safety of the world of the film. So up until this moment, we have existed as an audience member within the world of the film, unaware that there's anything influencing the world of the characters. However, this disruption forces us as viewers to be directly in Samet's mind. In other words, this is not a neutral moment of the film, but rather a moment where we clearly see that Samet's mind is shaping our reality within the context of the film. And this moment is also really important thematically because it emphasizes a moment of detachment. Samet is very isolated and cynical, and in this moment, we're no longer existing in his reality. And it gives us a glimpse of the performance of his life and emphasizes the fact that his life is more curated than it is lived. So we're actually gonna watch the scene. And I think I'm gonna play it twice for you guys. Once I'll just let it play, and then the second time we'll go over cinematography, mise en scène. It's a single take, so there isn't, I mean, editing is of course a factor, but there's just one take. And yeah. So let me know if you can hear.
Jade, I don't know. I think you might need to re-screen share with the
I think
audio.
the audio might just be a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me
Beware though, because when I had to share my audio, it makes you type in your password a bunch of times.
okay, let me
Be ready for that.
okay. Let me stop, of course, and then I will share sound. Okay. And I'll start this over as well. Okay. Let me know if you can hear it now. Perfect. And could you guys can still see the like my presentation and not just the presenter screen, right?
We can see like where you
Like
have
my
notes.
notes?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me stop share again because when we play it, I will talk over it. And there wasn't a lot of noise. I will comment on um the fact that there was the ambiance, ambient noise, I guess, of the soundstage, and then there's a moment where he lets out a sigh. But other than that, there isn't a lot of dialogue to analyze, so we should be good.
Jade, it's still on your
Oh
notes.
boy. I'm sorry about this. Okay.
Okay, we're all learning for the first time together.
Okay. You can see this now, right?
Yes, it's
Okay.
perfect.
Perfect. And then when I pull up this presenter window. Okay. So yeah, so again, he's just walking through the soundstage. Samet stays in the middle of the frame. For the most part, we see it's pretty dark. The lighting is very dark, very harsh throughout this. On his left and right, we see lots of things that are involved with the soundstage. There's a green screen on his right now. The camera movement is a tracking shot and it's on a steady cam. Likely, there's moments where you can see the shadow of the actual camera. There's a brief moment before he enters the bathroom where you can see that. But we stay following Samet sort of behind his head, which I think goes back to our discussion about being behind their heads when they're at the dinner table, because we're moving out of their heads and sort of seeing their perspective. But we'll come back to that. Anyways, he enters the bathroom. Bathroom things decorate the set here. He takes the Viagra out of his pocket, looks directly into the camera for a moment, and then drinks the water, swallows the pill. And now the lighting is everything is in focus, everything's clear. The lighting is overhead, and yeah, well lit now. And then he exits the bathroom. The camera continues to follow him, but then it lingers on this shot of the soundstage in the final moment. And that is the scene. So we're going to talk about the particular and then the universal. So, and can you see the images on the screen?
No.
Uh-oh. I was going to say they're showing up as little like thumbnails right now, so that's not good. All right. Sorry, group. The images are in fact important to the presentation. Okay. Okay. Can you see the images now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so for the particular, I really wanted to highlight the fact that this takes place in small town Anatolia, which is covered in snow. It's like super snowy, super isolated the whole time. There's a lot of talk about leaving the village, the town, and Nurai has the ability to leave whenever she wants as a teacher, but Samet does have to stay a certain amount of time before he can leave. And so my other bullet point is that confinement leads him to rebellion in a sort of way and attempts to reclaim his power. So we'll get into that. So the fact that there is no one around leads to this need to perform. But because no one is around, we are able to acknowledge the fact that he is living in a performance. If the town were bustling and full of people, it would be impossible to separate Samet's life from his performative life. But since he has all this time to himself, it becomes easy to have a moment of self-reflection. Um, Outside of my scene as well. The particular of small town Anatolia shows up in Samet's relationships. He pursues inappropriate relationships with his student Savim and then later Nurai. Not necessarily inappropriate with Nurai, but it's definitely inappropriate with Savim because she is his student. And in a way, both of these people are weaker than him. Um, because Savim is obviously a child and Nurai is missing a limb. So in that sense, she's weaker. Not necessarily, but like that's why I put weaker in quotes. His circumstances of the small deserted town where he feels out of place make him seek power where he doesn't have any. And he feels trapped in this world and breaks out also by not leaving the world physically but symbolically. So by breaking the fourth wall in this moment, he escapes the confinement of Anatolia for a split second. In Turkey, especially, there's a huge difference between the quiet, like eastern part, and then the hustle and bustle of the west, like especially with the capital. And so I think that this highlights Samet's alienation even further because it isn't just random. His isolation is a factor of his particular location. And then moving on to the universal, I said that to live is to perform. And so, again, this moment steps outside of the world of the film. Samet is a victim of his performance. And then the universality of this moment is that it highlights the human condition. So, this scene can be seen as universal in the way that it emphasizes stepping outside of the performance of living. Everyone plays a role, and this scene emphasizes a sort of self reflection and acknowledgement of the fact that we're constantly performing in some way. And it recognizes the gap between who we are and who we imagine ourselves to be. We can empathize with Samet in this moment because even though he's a cynical character and obviously has other flaws, He too is a victim of performance, and in this moment, he reveals a struggle with identity that's relatable to everyone. So, in other words, this scene highlights the human condition and is universal in the sense that we can all recognize that throughout our lives, it is very easy to fall victim to the act of putting on a performance, and being able to acknowledge that is only a part of overcoming it. And going back to the particular and connecting it to the universal, just because we aren't all from a small town in Turkey, doesn't mean we can all relate. Oh, well, we can all relate to feeling trapped at one point or another, or feeling a desire to step outside of your own life. Samet's Anatolian isolation becomes a metaphor for all forms of existential smallness, the sense of being trapped in a life that feels too narrow, too predetermined, and too suffocating. So now we're going to look at the cinematography, sound, and mise-en-scène of my particular frame that I have selected. So my representative frame is this frame, which I love because not only are we breaking the fourth wall in this scene within the film, but then in this moment he looks directly into the camera, and so it breaks the fourth wall even further. So there are a lot of parts of description, and I have a lot of things for mise-en-scène here. I have highlighted that there's towels, there's the mirror reflecting the bathroom supplies, which are behind him, but in the actual frame, they're in the right column. There's hand soap, there's a toothbrush, there's the sink, and then Samet, his costume, he's just wearing jeans. He's wearing a brown jacket and a black shirt, which is also, we can only see because it's reflected in the mirror. And then he's holding that Viagra packet. And then the composition, Samet is in the right middle of I guess the middle column. He's on the left side. And then his reflection is in the right side of that middle column. And the lighting is high key lighting. And then since this is a still frame, there's not like kinesis or movement. However, he is looking directly into the camera and he lingers a little bit before taking his Viagra pill. So continuing with cinematography in the description, it's a Steadicam, medium long shot, eye level shot, and it's a tracking shot leading up to this moment. Obviously, in the still frame, the camera's not moving. There's top lighting, it's soft light, and everything is in focus, which we'll talk about in a second. And it's also a very clean shot. There's nothing in the way. Has a very, I wouldn't say that there's really a foreground. Middle ground, I would say, is Samet, and then background is everything in the bathroom, and then his reflection. So continuing with sound cues, we also, again, in the still frame, there's no sound, but when we watch the scene and leading up to this, the sounds are the soundstage ambiance, and then you can hear the Viagra packaging as he opens it. But other than that, there's no dialogue and no music. And then the sound is diegetic, on-screen, external, and synchronized. All right, so moving into an analysis of this scene, we are breaking the fourth wall again. So while the scene that this frame is a part of is breaking this fourth wall, this frame takes that concept even further by having Samet look directly into the camera. And in this way, this is a turning point of the film because we've already exited the world of the film and been pulled into a semi-non-fictional reality. But this moment in particular emphasizes that Samet acknowledges the camera and us as an audience. So he now knows that he's being watched, and we share a brief moment of acknowledgement that his life is a performance. We also share in a brief moment of shame, I think, because directly following this eye contact, Samet takes the Viagra before returning to Nurai in the world of the film. But we'll talk about more of that when we interpret. And the mise-en-scène and cinematography are very intentional in this scene as well, and help strip away the fictional world of the film. So if we think back to previously in the film, in the dinner scene, the lighting is very low-key and harsh. There's a lot of harsh shadows, and it's very dark. But in this frame, everything is lit and in focus, and this strips away the facade of the film and pushes us even further into reality. So in other words, we're now seeing the world as it is instead of the previous constructed reality of the world of the film. So moving on to an interpretation, we aren't just looking at Samet, we're sharing a moment. So again, this frame shows that Samet is now aware of his life as a performance. He makes direct eye contact with the camera in a sort of shameful moment, and we are present with him more so than we were moments ago, as he walked through the soundstage because we weren't looking at him. We were looking at him, but it was the back of his head. And this moment, there's more of a connection. So this is a layered moment. So let's break it down. So first, his look is at the camera is not entirely shameful. It is also confrontational and self-aware. So he knows that he's being watched and acknowledges that we are watching him, but his eyes don't say, I'm ashamed. Instead, his look is suggests a sort of confrontation, like he's daring us to judge him. And he knows we're looking at him in this vulnerable moment and not only acknowledges our presence, but invites us to participate in his reality. So finally, my course reflection. So going into this course, I knew very little, if anything, about the Middle East and even less about cinema of the Middle East. Initially, I definitely fell victim to believing in stereotypes about the Middle East because of a lack of education about this seemingly foreign part of the world. However, throughout this class, I feel as though I've learned a lot about cinema of the Middle East and the Middle East itself. The biggest stereotype that I was able to combat this semester was that the films we watched, or through the films we watched, was the misconception that all Middle Eastern countries are the same. I knew that a variety of countries made up the Middle East, but before this course, I could not distinguish them from one another in any significant way. Now this belief has been dissolved because not only do I understand more about each country's unique and rich history, but I also have a much better understanding of each country's cinema. Films like Omar and Divine Intervention portrayed life under occupation in very different ways and told a story different from, say, our Turkish cinema. Even in films made within a certain country, all of them were unique. About Dry Grasses was very different from Burning Days, and both of those films were very different from Yol or The Road. Um, in other words, all places in the Middle East are distinct and unique, both in history and cinema. And the idea that nothing differentiates the entirety of the Middle East is a misconception that I'm glad I've gotten out of. Something that has really stuck out to me in this course is how to combat stereotypes about the Middle East. The thing that I've thought back on the most is stereotypes can be combated through laughter and, most importantly, art. So not all of the films we watched were humorous. Some of them were, like Divine Intervention, in a way that was brilliant and politically powerful. But all of the films we watched had some form of artistry. Even films I had a hard time enjoying, like Beirut or Oh Beirut or Yol slash The Road, were undoubtedly masterful in the way that they portrayed life in Lebanon and Turkey, respectively. The film that sticks out to me the most is Where's the Friend's House? I don't think I could watch that film and continue to hold any untrue stereotypes about Iran in my mind. So when you can laugh or smile or look at a piece of cinema in awe or connect emotionally to the characters, then slowly but surely your misconceptions are stripped away. Rana in The Salesman, Ahmad in Where's the Friend's House, Noraya in About Dry Grasses are all characters that stuck with me and made it impossible to think of people of the Middle East as one uniform group. That's why cinema is so powerful. Laughing with, crying with, and sympathizing with characters in cinema of the Middle East help dissolve harmful ideas that all the Middle East is the same, or that all people in the Middle East are villains. Overall, this class was not only fun but important. Getting to do a deep dive into cinema of the Middle East gave me a great appreciation for art and cinema outside of the US and really helped to dissolve my misunderstandings of what the Middle East is. Ultimately, this course opened my eyes to the beauty of international cinema and to the power of art everywhere. And thank you. Okay, I will stop sharing and open the floor to questions.
Okay, I have a question. First, that was a wonderful presentation. I'm
Thank
glad
you.
that you talked about that um moment and about dry grasses because I that also really stood out to me, but I didn't know what to make of it. And I really, really like your interpretation and analysis. I thought that was wonderful. But my question has to do with you mentioned Samet has relationships with people that are weaker than him. Do you think he
Mhm.
actively seeks out those relationships and why? Why do you think he does that?
I don't think it's an intentional thing, honestly. I think that his way of sort of rebelling against the like life of I don't know, just isolation that he finds himself in. He sort of tries to seek power in that. And so he preys on Savim and he preys on Nurai in a way that's sort of manipulative and he's aware of like the performance of his life and the fact that he's like not really the greatest person. Um, but I think that that's sort of a way for him to like feel in control of his life when it's sort of a chaotic existence, if that makes sense. Okay, great. I will pass it on to Eralys.
Hi guys. Okay, I'm gonna try my best to screencast this over really fast. So, like prior times, just let me know if it's working properly. Okay, I don't know if this is working or not.
I can see it. It's
Okay,
just not
I
like full
can,
screen, but
yeah.
here, I'm gonna open full screen in like half a second. Sorry, Ahmad. Okay. Okay, I'm not really sure how to open just normal style. I just needed it to be full screen. Okay, is that good? Can we see what's going on?
Yes,
yes.
it's good. It's full screen.
Perfect. Okay, I am presenting on the film 1982 by Walid Manes. And I'm going to be exploring some pivotal moments, especially towards the end with the scene with Tigran. Um, so yeah. One thing that I wanted to start by establishing with this film is just the a good reminder of what happens in it and then getting a little bit into that particularity. So essentially, this story unfolds over a single day in Lebanon in 1982. It follows the conflict of the Israeli occupation after the border conflict when they started to occupy Lebanon. And it follows a group of school children, sorry, who lead ordinary lives as the war approaches. So war in this sense becomes a peripheral force and something external to their depicted daily lives, rather than something that we see directly. Military conflict grows near during the plot of this day, and we can hear and see it in the distance as Wissam, our central character, experiences his day-to-day life and the things that are important to him, like trying to convey his affection to his school crush. So, yes. One thing that I wanted to bring up a little bit here in this section as well is the particularity of what's happening here, especially within the historical context. Um, I'm going to delve a lot into what the universality of this movie is because I feel like that's what, honestly, for me, this film encapsulates is something humanistic and real. But it's important to acknowledge that the conflict that we're witnessing, or even not witnessing, quote unquote, is particular to both Lebanon, but also war and conflict in the Israeli occupation, and just kind of the broader scheme of historical context. So the particularity here lies a lot in the war itself, but also in the experiences of the children or the characters, respectively. Um, and then the scene that I want to dive into is one that really stood out to me. I thought this was by far the most beautiful and striking moment in this movie. But it's Tigran protecting Lebanon with a barrier. And Tigran is like this character that we see throughout the movie Wissam illustrating. And it becomes his kind of mode and form of escapism. And this exact moment happens around 1:32:17, and it goes pretty much till the end of the film. Obviously disregarding the shot before the credits of the birds. So I was just going to show us that really fast. If it'll let me exit and let me know if this works as well. Okay. Can you see the screen switch?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. I will play this part then. And let me know if you can hear the audio.
I can hear it.
It's not letting me show it. Okay, well, I had to use a different medium for this one, and it's not really, I think it might be a copyright issue. But yeah. Essentially what we see occurring in this scene is that the force field of sorts that Tigran opens. Let me open this back up to normal. Sorry, team. The barrier that he deploys is reflective of the drawings that we've been seeing in Wissam's imaginative nature, essentially like how children respond to conflict in times of war and conflict in general. And all throughout this film, conflict is present, but it's indirect. We can hear distant aircraft, we see worried adults, and we feel tension that moves palpably in the background. The students don't understand the scope of what's happening around them, but they can feel it, and that's a viscerality that I think that we see reflected in both visuals and also in dialogue and presentation. And this scene, as a microcosm, is largely reflective of that. It kind of leads me into what I wanted to discuss with the terms of universal issues. The universality of this is more of the question of like, how do children cope with the danger that they cannot comprehend or control? And what exists outside of how we respond to conflict. And that's something that isn't just respective to a little town in Lebanon. It's something that any human can resonate with, and the feeling of innocence and not understanding something as a child, and even having your own broader scopes of problems that to you as a kid are really important, but maybe as an adult seem less important. And then another thing that I kind of wanted to touch on was just what children do when the world around them becomes too large, too violent, or unstable for them to comprehend. So as you can see in the film, it kind of divulges into the interruption of childhood and normal life. And we can see in scenes where they're in classrooms and stuff, how what's occurring around them is much broader than the microcosm of their day-to-day life. Innocence versus political violence, and the fear that's felt amidst conflict, even when it's unspoken. And that's a lot of what I think this scene with Tigran represents as well, is we see, which, sorry about that not playing, by the way, but we see this moment that's so visceral, where it's something that is projected onto their actual reality, but it's something that they feel and something that interpreted in their perspective is just as real for them, or they want to be just as real. And then just kind of that whole narrative in this scene as well, where they're all on the bus, where adults are kind of trying to shield the children from something very difficult to adapt to and to comprehend. And we can see in this shot as well, when the orb takes over the sky. To me, this was really striking because it reimagines the world in a form in which they can hold and protect and tame. And the towering robot expands a glowing and almost cell-shaped dome over Lebanon. So it's a force field, it's a barrier, it's something that helps to very distinctively protect them from the chaos. And I think also just like the editing of the scene is super important because it incorporates something that's not a direct shot. We go from the children looking out of the bus and staring to the horizon to seeing something that objectively isn't visible, but to them is visible. And I think it's a really great reflection of how throughout this film, a lot of it is shown from the children's perspective, or even supposes our perspective as a viewer into the eyes of what the children are seeing. And so this scene, I just feel like is a very visceral and honest representation of hope, or maybe even a glimmer of change, at least in the eyes of the people who are going to have to endure the conflict for much longer than it is presently occurring, or at least the fallout of it. I think that this is also where form meets meaning, and the film becomes not just emotionally powerful, but cinematically powerful. We see illustrations that become animation. It's not just something that's on his page, it's something that's projected onto real life, where it just is a visceral force that takes over the skyline. And there's a symmetry to it as well in this shot. And the mise-en-scene kind of focuses on something emerging as, you know, planes go by. And suddenly we're seeing something that for almost the entire film prior to this has been invisible, or an invisible force, I suppose. And then might have skipped ahead too far. Yep, there we go. One thing that I really noticed with the framing as well is that when we pan back prior to the shot that I'm talking about, there's a close-up of Wissam and Joanna, and it's the first time in this film that we can see somebody other than Wissam experiencing and emotionally understanding what he is bearing witness to. Even in scenes prior, when Wissam has been drawing or was sitting in the courtyard and he could see what was happening in front of him, it wasn't divulged to us as viewers that that was a visible perspective for anyone else. Suddenly, this becomes a universal experience for the children and is not just something respective to him as a character. Their eyes also reflect what's happening in front of them, which is interesting because it's almost as if that animation of Tigran is there and present in the physical realm and isn't just a metaphorical observation for what they hope to be happening or what they are respectively experiencing themselves. And then I feel like within the realm of like the particular, the school bus itself is really interesting because it becomes like an intimate microcosm of conflict for them, or at least where they're experiencing it. All of the children are gathered onto one bus, trying to get home or out of the way of conflict of something that throughout their school day they haven't been bearing direct witness to. So small details here help to carry the weight of both the shots, but also what we're experiencing. And then I really wanted to touch also on the music of the scene. I know we didn't get to hear it because unfortunately my thing wouldn't let me play like last time. But there is a really moving and powerful music that plays non-diegetically, and it's a score that's like you kind of feel it with these characters. It's intense and it's building and it's climactic because we're going from him emerging from the horizon, and it's this beautiful moment where something so resonant starts to reflect both with the children and what they're seeing, but also with what we get to view as the viewer. The cuts between Wissam's face, the comic, and the external world help to create subtle dialogue between fantasy and reality here. And there's no verbal explanation or adult voice in this scene, which is really important to note. The meaning here is purely cinematic. It's delivered through juxtaposition, where the editing helps tell us that the drawing is not separate from the war, but is born from the war. And I think when all of these elements fuse together, narrative, cinematography, sound, editing, and everything, they produce an emotional resonance that goes far beyond what a child is seeing or what is shown to a child, but rather through his artwork. The moment becomes a metaphor for innocence and how it survives under pressure and under the confines of war or conflict. Imagination in this context becomes resistance, and children invent shelter when none exists around them. Another notable part of this scene that kind of draws on my bullet point about small details carrying weight is just Tigran himself. If I can get it to go to this exact, sorry team, this moment. Tigran is impossibly large. He's larger than the buildings. He's almost mythic in a sense, and the scale reveals truth about his character, which is that Wissam, in the scheme of war, feels small and powerless in many senses. He invents a protector with the power that he seems to lack or feels that he lacks, and in this sense, children are given agency to fantasy figures when they are the embodiment of an unachievable control that perhaps lies outside the realm of the children's actual ability. The composition of the drawing and the shot is also placing a force field of a dominant visual object, so something that we see and that's protecting as a force field. And we are still bearing witness outside of this exact shot to the danger outside of the dome. There's aircraft, flames, and things penetrating, or at least attempting to, through the idea of what Wissam is projecting. So I think the interpretation of this scene, or at least something that I interpreted from it, is that Wissam is not drawing what is, he is drawing what should be. The force field is representative of hope in the broader scheme, and the shot and composition helps to reveal that drawing becomes a survival mechanism, and by proxy, art and media kind of exist as a means for children to escape. Yeah, and then I wanted to get a little bit into my reflection. This class has reshaped my understanding and comprehension of the region of the Middle East more than I think any other class or course or curriculum or reading ever has. Film has been like really present in my life for a long time. And I think it was easy for me to feel as if I had a broad scope and understanding of what film entailed, even just through the particular, you know. But this course touched so heavily on universality and what it means to understand things that lie outside of your own perception. I carried a fragmented impression of the Middle East that was formed mostly by political discourse and news headlines, and admittedly scattered images of media here and there on social media, or at least through the mediums that we most often have access to in the West. But the cinema in this course offered me an emotional and humanistic foundation of intimacy and understanding. And throughout the films, I encountered living rooms and beauty salons and plains of the Middle East and quiet domestic spaces that mirrored the parallel of everyday lives that are universal to existence. These films help to breathe life into broader narratives that Western media and perception don't give merit to most of the time. And for me, at least, they helped convey that the Middle East is not a singular place. It's not defined by a singular history. It's rather a layered and complex, diverse region that was created and grown and built upon with just as much tenderness and humanity as any other region. And I think that is a big gap, at least in the Western world, for what we are able to perceive of not just the Middle East, but any place that feels foreign to us. I wanted to delve really quickly into just kind of the distinctive films, or at least like things that I felt resonated with me in that context. I think there were a lot that stood out to me and helped to further establish this foundation, but films like Carmel felt like entering Beirut in a completely different world. You were looking at the context of something warm and bright in the contrast to conflict and things that we see so like often and commonly. Films like 1982, like I discussed, helped to reveal the same innocence and understanding of children and the perception of livelihood that exists within the opinions of the youth. And kind of just like seeing how Middle Eastern films breathe life into the narratives of people who maybe don't always have a voice. I don't think I realized before this course how often the Hollywood narrative kind of delves into specific perspectives, whereas we saw so many different types of people and observed so many different types of experiences and children's perspectives and older people and politics and regional conflicts and culture were all microcosms of something greater that each film kind of touched on. I guess what I mean to say, like all in all, is that this course has helped to show me that visual fixtures, such as a vanishing woman or a displaced child, could symbolize an entire nation's grief or growth. I suppose what became clear throughout this course was that cinema was not just reflective of society or cultures as microcosms in the Middle East, but rather a broader spectrum of society. It helped defy political censorship and open spaces for conversation that delved into emotional truths or contested media-based inaccuracies of the region. Yeah, this course just kind of showed me that cinema can be uniquely powerful in the sense that it is both a means of humanity and connection, but also something that can be politically important and culturally significant. So, yep. And then, thank you guys. If anybody has any questions, I would love to answer some questions.
Yes, you kind of already talked about this, but I wanted to ask, could you expand slash what is the significance you think of the film being from the perspective of children?
Yeah, no, I love that question. And I mean, I did talk a lot, admittedly, but one thing that I really think is important, at least for the intentionality of perspective here, is that like I think seeing events in any film through a child's eyes makes it a lot more emotionally striking. That's a lot of why I chose that shot in particular of Tigran, is because there's something universal to the feeling of innocence or not knowing something. A lot of times, what's depicted in Middle Eastern cinema is a direct translation of what's occurring in front of you. Whereas when we kind of look through a child's perspective, it highlights something that's confusing sometimes, or like frames something as difficult as war through the context of someone who might not fully understand it, but still feels those things that are important to them and still has very visceral senses of right and wrong. I think that also it's important to kind of highlight children's perspectives in this scope because it helps avoid direct political framing. So instead of this film, which isn't a bad thing, but as we've seen in a lot of other films, politics kind of lie at the forefront of the conflict, whereas this, I think, kind of shifted the perspective to show how politics interact with humans or children, and what those day-to-day lives look like, even amidst something difficult that we, perhaps in the West, can't even comprehend happening directly to us. Um, it's a very honest and universal way, I think, to like show that perspective and explain what's happening throughout this story. So, yeah, I hope that answered your question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I will stop sharing because I would love to hear from Miss Zcherina.
Okay, hi guys. Can you hear me all right? I'm just gonna share my screen. Um, let's see. So, hopefully. Okay. Can you see me all right? Does this like look fine? I can't really tell.
Yes, I can see you and the screen. So,
Okay, and it's not like okay. All right, okay. Hi everyone. I'm gonna be talking about the film Divine Intervention. It's a 2002 dark comedy film directed by Palestinian filmmaker Elia Suleiman. Let's get into a little quick synopsis about what this is about. Okay, so Divine Intervention is a dark comedy film directed, as I said, by Elia Suleiman. This film follows a series of vignettes or short episodic scenes that follow the absurdities of Palestinian life and culture under occupation. So the central narrative follows the character ES, or basically Elia Suleiman, and who lives in Nazareth and tries to navigate a relationship with a woman living in Ramallah, which forces them to meet discreetly in a parking lot near an Israeli checkpoint. And that is the main story, even though there are multiple short vignettes and plot points. This is the central one. So now let's just go into, I could reshare my screen to like this. Oh, hold on. There we go. Okay, let's reshare this with audio. How do I do this? Share. Okay. All right. Oh. Okay. Can you guys see this all right? Can you hear it fine?
I can see it. I can't hear it yet, but is it playing?
Okay, here, I'll play it and let me know. Oh, oops. Can I please play? What is going on here? No. What is this? Okay, there we go.
The
I
audio
can hear
seems
it.
You can hear it?
יגאל,
כן,
בוא תראה.
איפה?
שם. ומה נהיה?
רונן, תודה, בוא תראה. תודה, תסתכל לשם. תלות, הקטע, תלות. הייתי תפוס עלינו תחת, אה? תגיד לי, מה, אתה השתגעת? תוריד את זה. מה אתה לחוץ? רונן ל-24, שומע?
שומע.
יש פה איזה בלון שהעיפו, אנחנו רוצים להוריד אותו, זה אפשרי?
חכו להוראות.
Okay, that was my scene. Let me stop sharing real quick and go back to my presentation. Um, okay, can you guys see that all right? Or there's nothing on the screen, but do you see this?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And it's not, my screen isn't like on the side of your screen, it's fine.
It's in, yeah, it's in the
Okay,
middle.
okay, okay.
And then
Just
you're
wanna make
just
sure.
like to the side. Yeah.
Okay, okay, perfect. Okay, so also I want to mention that I tried to replicate some of the scenes that are in the like little notes that they have in the film, but I understand that Google Translate is not the most accurate in translating English to Arabic, but I did try my best. Okay, anyways, so let's talk about the particular. I think that because this film is, and a lot of Elia Suleiman's films are kind of semi-autobiographical, it's important to talk about the director. I know that we've already talked about this in class a little bit. But just as a little refresher, Elia Suleiman grew up in living under a Zionist occupation, a geopolitical reality illuminated through his distinct and darkly comedic perspective, where Suleiman plays the role of the silent, observing protagonist in a good chunk of his films, of which includes Divine Intervention, A Chronicle of Disappearance, and The Time That Remains. And specifically for this film, his deadpan silence is used to portray the absurdities and anxieties experienced in Palestine. This film specifically, and his film style in general, kind of focuses on the everyday and repetition, with his films frequently relying on quiet and repeated rituals of life, like waiting, smoking, driving, and observing neighbors, told through non-linear storytelling. And by capturing these mundane moments, he highlights how the extraordinary stress of occupation seeps into and warps the ordinary, turning these habitual routines into the absurd. He also kind of theatrically frames his positioning of the camera in this film, dramatically choreographing the kinesis of the scene to emphasize these seemingly random vignettes that happen all throughout the film. Divine Intervention specifically, and Elia Suleiman cemented himself to have a historical shift in Palestinian cinema, with Divine Intervention being seen as a key film that shifted the narrative of documentary style images of the overt struggle towards more of an emphasis on the psychological and existential effects of occupation on Palestinian people. And through this film, he won prizes like the Jury Prize at the Cannes Film Festival. But I also want to talk about the political context of Palestine because I think that it's very important to highlight this, especially because a lot of Palestinian cinema is informed by and shaped by what is going on around them. So, Suleiman in this film is contrasting two very different styles of control in the 1948 Palestinian status of people living in Nazareth. So there's Nazareth right there, and where ES or Elia Suleiman's character lives, and Ramallah, where the woman lives. She doesn't have a name, but she lives inside of the West Bank. So because of the 1948 displacement, it became it became a reality for the people living in Elias Sayman. While he lives under a civil system, the group faces a legal and economic discrimination and institutional bias, which creates this atmosphere that Suleiman references. So it's also important to talk about the military law and unchecked authority of the West Bank. So in the West Bank, the IDF operates under a system called military law, where Palestinian civilians are essentially subject to extensive unchecked powers of search, detention, control, and magnifying their personal authority and allowing them to detain anyone for disorderly conduct, which kind of explains the reason why ES and the woman were kind of sitting there, making sure they were discreetly getting through that border. So for ES and the woman, the characters must step on eggshells when they're meeting. Any unusual movement or speech could be interpreted as a threat or violation, leading to some confrontation and arrest. So this is why they have this balloon going out and floating into the air. This checkpoint system kind of shows the matrix of control that the IDF has, where specifically they are at the Al Ram checkpoint, where ES and the woman meet. Because they live on opposite sides, they need to have these Israeli issued permits to pass. And this permit system is central to fragmenting Palestinian society, making it so then simple meetings like the one that we see in this film are difficult. And so making basic human connection, like dating, an act of transgression. And it highlights the arbitrary control over daily life. So at these checkpoints, West Bank Palestinians are subject to military law, while Israeli personnel operates with a near absolute authority, which is a legal dualism that enables the absurdity and tension that you see in this film. Which also features the image right here of the Palestinian political leader and chairman of the PLO of the time, Yasser Arafat. And because he's floating through the air, they somehow perceive it as a threat, even though it is a harmless balloon. But now that we've talked a little bit about the, excuse me, about the particular, we're going to go into more of the universal, more on overturning and disrupting the narrative. So this scene in the film presents a perspective contradictory to what people in the media are usually exposed to in Palestinian representation, specifically showing humor and how it can be used as a form of resistance. In the narrative of a region rife with tragedy, those stories are the ones that are usually represented to humanize people. However, divine intervention does exactly what the title says. It divinely interrupts the single narrative that has been pushed by the majority. Humor has its way of unexpectedly dismantling the authority of oppressors by building solidarity among those who are repressed. And in this film being integrated into popular cinema, it shows how those narratives and those news stories that you usually see on Western news tabloids that constantly portray tragedy and harm on those people, it shows how they are taking this as their own form of control. And in this way, divine intervention works towards dismantling fear and moving towards facilitating social change and awareness, showing how humor can be used by the suppressed voices through cinema, art, or whatever medium as a testament as to how resistance can be accessible as simply making people laugh. And the use of humor provides of an easier entrance into discussing the film's greater political message or a way of allowing people that necessarily wouldn't have had a perspective on Palestine or the Middle East to enter in a way that is not just through Western news. As Elia Suleiman says himself, cinema is not meant to reinforce the national image or its opposite, the negative image of the other. I want to open the way to multiple spaces that lend themselves to different readings, trying to create an image that transcends the ideological definition of what it means to be a Palestinian, an image far from any stereotype. Uh, as he notes, these narratives, which include cinema, all create this story as to how we perceive people in Palestine or people of the Middle East. And through the cinema and providing this narrative that is outside of what we are usually used to seeing, especially here in the West, it allows us to overturn this concept coined by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie that's called the danger of a single story, where if we're constantly fed the same kind of news outlet, the same kind of narratives by one specific group, knowing that they align with one group, we're going to be met with a monolithic idea of what Palestinian people or what people in general are like. And by amplifying and seeking out the humanity of these people, this film helps us move toward a collective and better understanding of one another, especially for those narratives that have been dominated by those in power. Okay, so now I want to talk about film form and style, talking about mise-en-scène, cinematography, and the like. So I just want to go back to this scene that we just watched. If I could share this again. Okay. Can you guys see my screen all right?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's go back to 5:31. Okay. Oops. Okay, so we open with a scene of that frames a medium close shot at eye level once we make contact with the camera that puts the IDF soldier in the background, posing this deep space composition where ES moves up to the woman where they meet together. With the camera movement generally in a still position in tandem with the characters, with the note that we had saw previously, highlighting this kind of literal boundary between the physical space, car, and checkpoint that forces these two to remain at arm's length when we see them enter the car. Where they're just staring at each other, they recognize the Israeli soldier, kind of recognizing this boundary that exists between the two of them. And this stillness combined with the subtle, almost robotic movements of Suleiman and the woman kind of emphasizes the actions that are not meant, that are not allowing them to show compassion towards one another. So then he blows up this balloon with this scene accompanied by a lot of silence. It allows the tension between the two main characters as an immense to show the immense psychological stress that they're under, which is forcing them to meet under these ludicrous circumstances. And you can see that the woman is analyzing what's happening. And as Yasser Arafat's face takes form, it kind of blows up the absurdity of this situation. And because of the lack of dialogue, I'm staring at the camera, the silence further emphasizes every single movement of the scene, especially with the highlight of the bright, distinct red balloon of Yasser Arafat's face. So moving into extreme long shots, we then see from this point forward how the IDF soldiers interact with this balloon, perceiving it as a threat, then moving into the non-diegetic sound that is kind of this mischievous, but at the same time innocent way of showing how these IDF soldiers are perceiving this balloon as a threat. This kind of music helps the balloon's journey feel
מיגל,
kind of
בוא תראה.
whimsical and
איפה?
unburdened,
שם.
allowing it to fly and surpass literal checkpoints, showing how Israeli uh, the Israeli perspective can view simple figures, even if they're not real people, as how they are taking over and kind of looming over the state that
מה
they're
נהיה?
living in.
רונן, תודה, בוא תראה. לא, תסתכל לשם. לא, לא
This
נגעת,
scene
לא.
is also, I think, like I said before, extremely theatrical in its ways of portraying the humor, as it makes,
תגיד לי מה, אתה
like,
השתגעת? תוריד את זה.
like the soldier is saying, as in making them look ridiculous.
רונן
And they
לספר,
recognize
שומע?
that, yet they are still
יש
calling
פה
and
איזה
talking to people
בלון
about
שהעיפו,
how
אנחנו
this
רוצים
balloon
להוריד
can be
אותו, זה
taken down
אפשרי?
despite it being completely harmless. And then we see closer, we see the camera steady and following the balloon, almost showing how there isn't any danger at this moment, yet because of the balloon's movement around, it shows how really this is not going to affect anyone, almost posing the balloon as an innocent form of mischief. I'd also want to highlight that the balloon in this scene is kind of used as a prop, and it's a central element of the mise en scène that presents all that is bizarre about the situation itself. The balloon, the object associated with, is like an object that's associated with comedy and innocence. And in it interacting with the serious force of the IDF soldier, it creates this hilarious juxtaposition that is a distinct characteristic of the film's comedy, almost downplaying the power of the Israeli forces, allowing ES and the woman to easily surpass the checkpoint at the end of the scene. Okay, now we'll just move back. Okay, can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Now I want to talk about a specific frame. Obviously, the infamous frame of this film and also the post that's literally the poster of the film. I want to talk about the stark contrast that you see between the balloon and of Suleiman's character. So Suleiman's wearing a tan sweatshirt that is in obvious contrast to the bright comical balloon with Yasser Arafat's face, communicating the exact message of the film that frivolity can hold so much power. So when the camera lingers on the flight of the balloon for a very long and unconventional time, it kind of emphasizes the point that Suleiman is making. The Arafat could symbolize how the face as the face of Palestinian people like himself and how it lies undetected past the Israeli soldiers. It makes a point of their incompetence and the need for resistance against them and how their unchecked powers are leading to scenarios like this, even though it's an exaggerated and very theatrical presentation of how we are using this humor as a form of resistance. It shows how these people are perceived as a threat. You see this in this medium close shot of Suleiman's character with his deadpan face featuring his comical expression of Yasser Afrat. The intention and movement of his face is like lit by the backlighting of the car, showing how it is specifically soft lighting their faces, along with the still motion of his character. It kind of emphasizes that this action's not to bent to be violent by any means. The camera stays close to Suleiman for this moment and then highlights that there's a lack of malicious intent. There's no harsh lighting showing how there could potentially be an evil force at hand. But the character genuinely just wants to spend time with his significant other, switching the narrative from a typical black and white Palestine-Israeli conflict, then to the central narrative of a man that will simply do anything to be with the one that he loves. Okay, so in this class, I initially had really not thought about the Middle East or Middle Eastern cinema as this. I thought of it as this separate entity as to what um, Hollywood had presented it to be. Admittedly, I'd only seen these Hollywood perceptions of Middle Eastern people and what they perceived the Middle East to be, rife with war and conflict and tragedy. But in this class, I've really expanded my worldview to be portrayed the way to see how Middle East people of the Middle East want to be portrayed and have access to this multicultural lens that allows me to analyze and interpret films outside of this Hollywood lens of viewing cinema, which I think is a powerful way of how we can amplify, like I said before, Palestinian peoples or those suppressed voices that are usually suppressed by the Western mindset. I think this film has allowed me to look at other films that I had initially really liked before and seen how how they're influenced by Orientalism and these ideas that people have had on Middle Eastern people. And I think that this class had really emphasized why cinema can be so powerful as a medium of amplifying these people's voices, as all people in the Middle East are different and have their own stories. And it really isn't a monolith that the West tries to perceive it to be. And just because we all learn this one way of perceiving a group of people, actually hearing it through the stories and voices of people from that region is as important to how we can continue to amplify the narratives of Palestinian people or people from Turkey and how their voices in their everyday lives are not as different from ours here in the United States or anywhere else, how theirs are just informed by these geopolitical or conflicts that have been imposed by Western powers. And I think it's best said in Suleiman's interview, where he talks about how Hollywood films add into this pollution of language that we specifically have when it comes to films and cinema in general. We don't allow people to have their own perspective or to create their own perspective. And allowing ourselves to really digest and interpret these films ourselves, it's letting us hold space for what these people are talking about through an artistic medium and showing how cinema and art and all these different mediums don't have to just be portrayed as these sad tragedies or um, or monoliths, but can be expanded into something more than that. As Suleiman points out, he says that he makes his films because he is politicized, as we all are. But Palestine and the Middle East itself is not the residence of politics. Politics informs how we view the way we see the Middle East. So, in order to leave space for these different interpretations, we must turn to mediums like cinema and art to really amplify and perceive the world from what is traditionally viewed through the dominating lens of Hollywood. And that is my presentation. Okay, I now open the floor to some questions that anyone may have on my presentation.
I had a question, if that's okay. I know that you touched a lot on this. Also, beautiful presentation, by the way, very touching. But I just wanted to ask, at least from your perspective, like, how do you feel universally that humor can be a medium for resistance? Maybe
Yeah.
not just within the scope of this film, but the broader scope as well.
hmm I think humor can be really important in not only adding levity to a situation that like the conflicts in the Middle East or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but also because it's a shared emotion that we all as humans have. And in allowing people to laugh and have fun with one another despite tragedy, it allows people to have a more accessible avenue into viewing different kinds of conflicts and the way we perceive war and the way we perceive each other as people. Because I think in the midst of conflict and war, we kind of forget that we are people, and in being able to laugh and see that, oh, these people can have fun and these people have different viewpoints on each other despite us not agreeing, it really shows how humor can kind of change how the central narrative is on a group of people. As the article that we read in class, it shows that how these people of the Middle East were not props. And I think especially it's really well demonstrated through the scene that I had shown by putting a prop as a person and showing how this balloon, this object, is this obscure moment uh of let me find the word, fear and it's like an opponent for other people. It shows, it kind of makes fun of that and shows how, hey, we aren't props, we are humans. And I think also in allowing like deadpan humor or humor that kind of fits outside of the box, it kind of in its own way humanizes this group of people and showing how they must get around to loving one another and being close to one another. So in that way, humor is a powerful way of subverting what we traditionally see as activism or advocacy or um, promoting awareness about different conflicts and what's going on in the world.
That was such a poignant response. Thank you, Zcherina.
Thank you.
I didn't want to make this any longer than it has to be. I did figure out a way to show the clip that I meant to show earlier if we wanted to end on a hopeful Lebanese note. But if not, that's okay too.
Yeah, sure. Play the clip.
Cool. Okay. Sorry, Ahmad. Don't know why that didn't work the first time. But let's see if it'll let me know. Oh my gosh, you're right about the password thing.
Did it make Sharina and Jade, did it make you guys do that too?
Yeah.
It made me type it in like 6 times.
Okay. I just wanted to show this part. I felt like maybe it would also be just a good way to end this. So yeah, here's that scene so that we can connect some hopefully decent explanations from my prior presentation to the scene itself. Is the audio playing?
I can't hear it.
No, the music's the best part. Ah, maybe it won't work. I'm sorry, team. Either way.
No worries.
That's okay.
Oops. Okay,
Okay.
well, I think that was a successful. Everybody did a great job,
Yes.
so thank
You
you.
all did so wonderful. I want to like rewatch all the
I
films
know,
now and like think about everything that you've said.
right,
Yeah,
but
I really
yeah,
enjoyed
thank
listening
you.
to all of your
Also,
presentations.
thank you to Ahmad. I feel like this class has been such a gift, and it's really
Yes,
Yes.
I agree.
just like, I don't know, it's exciting to be passionate about something. And I think that,
Yes,
this class has given me, at least personally, like a good medium of, I don't know, exploration and looking at
Yeah.
like all of these things that maybe I had no glimpse of before. So
Yeah,
yeah.
same. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.